first photo landed on my phone at 10:07 a.m. It was a group shot, sun-drenched smiles, white linen dresses, pastel suits, champagne flutes held high. The caption read, "Rehearsal done, tomorrow's the big day." I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I cared who was getting married, but because the backdrop, the arched stone terrace, the ivy-covered walls, the string lights coiled around wrought iron railings, was painfully familiar. I knew that venue. I chose it. Or rather, I paid for it. My fingers hovered over the image. I didn't like it, didn't zoom in, didn't even respond. I just closed the message and set my phone face down on the kitchen counter, next to a half-sliced lemon and a glass of water gone warm. For a moment, everything around me went quiet, as if even the apartment held its breath. The wedding was tomorrow. His wedding. Marcus. I hadn't been invited. That part wasn't a surprise. But what caught me wasn't the exclusion. It was the setting. The realization that they had kept the venue I'd found, the one I had signed for, paid the deposit on, and curated down to the last detail when we were still us. Back then, it was a dream we shared. A terrace strung with lights, an open-air dance floor under the stars, a soft jazz trio playing something vintage and hopeful. He said it felt timeless. I agreed. I always did. I put the deposit down a week later. But now, it wasn't our venue anymore. It was theirs. And yet, not entirely. Because what Marcus forgot, what his new bride and his ever-condescending mother clearly didn't consider, was that my name was still on the booking. The venue required one point of contact, one financial lead, and that had been me. A detail buried in the fine print, one that hadn't been amended, one that mattered. I stood in my kitchen, the hum of the fridge the only sound, and I let the weight of that truth settle, not with bitterness, not with rage, but with precision. The kind that comes when you've been dismissed, discarded, and underestimated one time too many. He thought I'd fade quietly, that I'd let them dance over the bones of a life I helped build and never look back. But they left the door open. And I don't walk away from what's mine without closing it myself. Tomorrow was supposed to be their perfect day. They just didn't know it was still my venue, and that perfection comes with a price. It was tucked inside the third drawer of my filing cabinet, between warranty papers and an expired passport, folded twice, crisp and clean. The original receipt, dated 18 months ago. Venue name at the top, followed by an itemized breakdown. Total deposit, 7 pond. Paid in full, by me. I remember the day I booked it. Marcus had come home late, again, grinning that boyish grin he used when he wanted something to feel easy. He kicked off his shoes, loosened his tie, and kissed the top of my head while I sat at the kitchen table with 3 different brochures spread before me. "This one," he said, pointing at the glossy image of that stone terrace. "It looks like Tuscany. Your mother will love it." My mother. He always did that. Made plans with my money, my effort, but dressed it up as our shared dream. I had been the one calling vendors, setting appointments, asking about acoustics, lighting, logistics. He'd shown up late to half the meetings, charming but detached, already treating the wedding like something that would simply happen for him. But I believed in the vision, believed in us back then. So I signed the papers and used my savings. Temporary, I told myself. He'll pay his half once his bonus clears. That bonus never came. Neither did his half. Instead, he took the venue, the dream I financed, and built someone else's wedding on top of it. I sat at my desk, recede between my fingers, and felt the shift inside me. Not anger, not even betrayal, just the cold click of realization. They hadn't forgotten. They'd assumed I wouldn't remember. Or worse, that I wouldn't care. His mother, especially. I thought back to the last time I saw her. A dinner in late fall, too many candles on the table, too much wine in her glass. She leaned over her creme brulee, met my eyes, and said with a soft smile, "You're a lovely girl, Jasmine, but not everyone's meant to be a wife. You understand, don't you?" Marcus hadn't said a word, just took another bite of dessert and changed the subject. I excused myself early and cried in the car, not because her words surprised me, but because they didn't. They never saw me as permanent. Just the scaffolding he could stand on until the real structure was ready. Now they were decorating that structure. Same terrace, same lights, same everything. Except the name on the contract hadn't changed. And names, when tied to money, mean something. I slipped the receipt into a manila folder and labeled it in neat black ink. Venue, deposit. They wanted my silence, but silence has terms, and mine had expired. She wore pearls. Of course she did. A 3-strand choker that sat high on her neck, pristine against her champagne-colored blouse. Her lipstick matched the wine, her tone matched the knife. It was supposed to be a casual lunch, the kind that starts with pleasantries and ends with a hollow hug, but by the second course, the air had thickened. The waiter had just cleared the salad plates when she leaned forward and tilted her head, the way she always did when she was about to deliver something backhanded in a velvet box. "Jasmine, dear," she began, resting her hand lightly on her wineglass, "have you ever considered what kind of legacy you want to build?" It wasn't really a question, not the kind meant to be answered. She continued before I could reply. "Marriage isn't about love. Not entirely. It's about alignment, values, families coming together." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "And sometimes, no matter how much you care for someone, you realize the pieces don't quite fit." I kept my face still, neutral. The kind of look I'd practiced in mirrors and meetings. The one that says, "I hear you, but I don't bend." "I've always admired your ambition," she added, lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're very capable. But Marcus needs someone who knows how to build a home. Someone who makes space for him to lead." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. That was the point. She wasn't inviting discussion. She was offering a warning dressed as observation. It wasn't the first time she'd poked at the edges of my identity. Subtle digs about my career, the long hours, the solo travel. She once told me, while sipping espresso in my apartment, that real wives don't need calendars to remember anniversaries. But that day, she dropped the pretense. That day, she told me I wasn't wife material. Her voice never rose. Her expression never soured. But the message landed hard. "And Marcus?" He said nothing, stirred his coffee, checked his phone, changed the topic. Afterward, in the car, I asked him if he agreed. He laughed, light and dismissive. "She just worries too much. Don't take it personally. She's old school." I let the subject drop, not because I agreed, but because I saw it clearly then. The hierarchy, the power dynamic. He was never going to fight for me. He was always going to float, to let the current of his mother's expectations carry him wherever was easiest. And now, that current had carried him to the altar, with someone else. Someone more suitable. Someone pre-approved. But none of them had remembered the most important detail. The dream venue, the perfect little terrace she'd boasted about to her bridge club, the one that made her feel like she'd orchestrated something tasteful and grand, was still under my name. And suitable or not, I still held the keys. We didn't end in chaos. No slammed doors, no yelling in the rain, just a Tuesday night with tired voices and too much space between us on the couch. I remember the light from the floor lamp casting long shadows on the wall. The jazz playlist we always forgot to turn off was playing in the background, some old saxophone piece that made the silence feel even heavier. Marcus sat on the edge of the cushion, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I stayed upright, spine straight, fingers laced in my lap. We'd reached the point where everything had already been said. The rehearsed explanations, the quiet pleas to try harder. The subtle blame passed back and forth like a hot coal we were both too tired to hold. "We're not working," I said, my voice steady. "We both know it." He nodded, slow, reluctant. "Maybe we just need space." I looked at him then, really looked. At the man I'd once believed in. The one who used to bring me coffee during deadlines, who kissed my shoulder before I woke up, but also the man who withdrew, who smiled through conflict, who let his mother cut me down while he bit his tongue. "I think we've had all the space we need," I replied. He didn't argue. Instead, we started sorting through the logistics. Who would keep the apartment until the lease ended? How to split the utilities? The last month of rent? The joint checking account we opened for shared bills, though he'd used it more often than I had. "We'll be fair," he said. "No games, right?" Right? We shook on it, like business partners dissolving a venture. Like two people too exhausted to pretend anymore. He moved out the next morning. Took his clothes, his sneakers, the French press I never liked. Left behind a toothbrush, a half-empty bottle of cologne, and a note on the counter that just said, "Thanks for everything. I'm sorry." I folded the note once and put it in the drawer with old receipts. Not out of sentiment, just habit. In the days that followed, I cleaned. Wiped down counters, vacuumed rugs, opened windows. I needed air, needed space untouched by shared history. I reprogrammed the thermostat, changed the Wi-Fi password, rearranged the bookshelves. Quiet acts of reclamation. There was no grief, only an ache that moved like background noise. Not loud, but persistent. The kind you learn to live around. What we had wasn't tragic. It was unfinished, unkept, worn thin by avoidance and misalignment. And as I settled into my new rhythm, solo dinners, quiet weekends, early mornings without compromise, I thought that was the end. I thought we'd both walk away, clean and done. But some people don't know how to leave without taking something that isn't theirs. Marcus didn't yell when we ended. He didn't fight. But he did forget that silence doesn't mean surrender. And I don't forget the terms we agreed on. It was an old habit I never broke. Keeping everything. Receipts, confirmations, contracts. I didn't trust memory alone. Paper spoke louder, especially when people started rewriting the past to suit their comfort. So when I found the email thread with the venue coordinator, it wasn't by accident. I had labeled it M+J Wedding. Venue details. It sat quietly in my inbox, untouched since the day I forwarded the deposit confirmation. The email was still there. Subject line, initial payment received, confirmation attached. I clicked it open and there it was. PDF attachment. My name on the account, card details redacted, and the clause I remembered most. Primary contact will remain responsible for final balance unless a formal transfer is submitted in writing. There had been no transfer, no updated signature, no form submitted. I downloaded the PDF and opened a new folder on my desktop. Venue invoice. This wasn't nostalgia. This wasn't heartbreak. This was about responsibility, about being treated like I was invisible after fronting thousands of dollars for a dream I no longer shared. I hadn't thought about the venue in months. Not since the breakup. It had faded into the background noise of everything we were supposed to become. But now it was center stage again, reappearing like a debt no one expected to collect. I didn't act immediately. I gathered, researched, located the original vendor agreement, downloaded the terms, highlighted the sections that mattered. Clause 7.11. Primary contact reserves the right to cancel the booking with no refund unless full payment is received by the final deadline. Clause 8.3. All adjustments to primary contact or payment responsibility must be confirmed in writing and acknowledged by both parties. Both parties, not just him, not his mother, me. I printed everything, put it in a manila folder, labeled it clearly, venue, legal. Not to be dramatic, not to be threatening, but because I needed the reminder that this wasn't personal anymore. It was transactional, just like they had treated me. I called the venue next. Spoke to a polite woman named Claire. I gave her my name. She confirmed it. Yes, you're still listed as the primary, she said. Is there a change you'd like to make? No, I said. I just want to confirm the balance hasn't been paid. A pause. Keystrokes. Then, it hasn't. Final payment is due by 5 p.m. tomorrow, otherwise the reservation will be released. That was all I needed to hear. I thanked her, hung up, and added the timestamp to my notes. The file was almost complete now. They'd planned a wedding on my deposit, made speeches, arranged tables, sent invitations with cursive fonts and soft linen paper, but they forgot something critical. The venue wasn't paid in full, and unless it was, there would be no wedding. By mid-morning, the posts had started. Tagged photos, behind-the-scenes videos, captions dripping with curated joy. Can't wait to celebrate love. She's glowing. He's the luckiest man alive. I watched the timeline unfold from my kitchen, coffee cooling in my hand. I didn't scroll out of spite. I scrolled like a witness, one who knew how much of it was borrowed, how much of it still belonged to me. The venue stood behind them like a stage set. Same archways, same garden path I once walked with Marcus, discussing floral arrangements and string lights. He'd said he wanted something elegant but simple. I made it happen. Booked every vendor, ran every number. I carried that vision in spreadsheets and late-night emails while he drifted between half commitments and soft promises. Now they were claiming it like it was always theirs. She wore a white silk robe. Her friends toasted with mimosas. His mother posed in the entryway, chin tilted as if presiding over a dynasty. But none of them looked nervous. That was the part that struck me. No one looked like they were worried about payment. No one looked like they had read the final invoice. Because they hadn't. I checked the time. 11:38 a.m. The deadline was 5 p.m. I had sent the email hours earlier. A clean professional message with the subject line, "Final venue balance due today, immediate action required." Attached was the invoice, the reminder of the agreement, and one clear line. Failure to remit payment by the deadline will result in cancellation per contract terms. No dramatics, no personal jabs, just business. I had included Marcus, his mother, the venue coordinator. No one had replied. That didn't surprise me. They'd always preferred silence over confrontation, preferred to believe that if they ignored discomfort long enough, it would disappear. But not this time. I sat back and looked out the window. The sky was clear, no clouds, no wind. A perfect day for a wedding. Unless the venue didn't open its gates, unless the chairs stayed stacked, the lights stayed off, the music never played, I imagined them getting ready in borrowed confidence. Her dress zipped up, his cufflinks adjusted, photos staged. All the while, the venue remained unpaid, a clock ticking just beneath the surface. That's the thing about appearances. They only hold if the foundation stays hidden. And I had pulled back the curtain. There was no revenge in this. No performance. Just a promise, honored to myself, that I would no longer fund dreams I wasn't part of. They had the flowers, the cake, the speeches written. But the one thing they didn't have, the one thing they needed, was my consent. And without that, all they had was a date on a calendar and a borrowed stage. I read the contract again, not out of doubt, but for certainty, clause after clause, each one underlined in the copy I had printed and placed on my desk. The language was blunt, legal, impersonal, but the meaning was clear. Non-payment by the final deadline results in forfeiture of reservation. No refunds, no reschedules, no exceptions. I could still remember sitting in the venue's office months ago, high ceilings and the scent of fresh paint clinging to the air. The coordinator walked me through each page. I had initialed every line, signed every form. Back then, it had felt like preparation. Now, it was evidence. They had until 5 p.m. I composed the email in one sitting. No drafts, no hesitation, just the necessary words. To Marcus Shaw, Evelyn Shaw, CC, Claire Reynolds, venue coordinator. Subject, final venue balance due, immediate action required. Dear Marcus and Evelyn, this is a formal notice regarding the outstanding balance on the venue reservation at Eldon Terrace scheduled for tomorrow. As the primary contact on file, I'm obligated to ensure final payment is received before the established deadline of 5 p.m. today. Please note that under the signed agreement, failure to fulfill the remaining balance will result in cancellation with no refund or rescheduling. This clause was clearly outlined at the time of booking. Attached is the original invoice and contract language for your reference. Kind regards, Jasmine Rowe. I attached the documents, cross-checked the addresses, clicked send. The silence that followed was deliberate. I didn't refresh my inbox. I didn't check for read receipts. I returned to my tea, let it steep too long, let the day unfold without interruption. This wasn't a threat. It was an obligation. They had relied on my name, my silence, my tendency to keep the peace. Marcus had always assumed I wouldn't rock the boat, that I would take the hit quietly and let them build their new beginning on my unspoken contributions. But silence doesn't equal permission. And when someone makes you the financial backbone of a fantasy, they forget you might remember. The phone didn't ring. No messages came. The group chat, the one I was never removed from, buzzed with a photo of bridesmaids holding gift bags and laughing. The caption read, "Final prep done, time to relax." It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so familiar. The calm of people who believed someone else would clean up the mess, who thought the details didn't matter as long as the pictures looked good. But this time, the details were mine. The terms weren't emotional. They were printed, signed, filed. And when 5 o'clock came, if no payment had cleared, the reservation would vanish like it was never theirs to claim, because it never really was. It was mine, until I said otherwise. The afternoon moved slowly, not in that drifting, idle way, but with purpose. Like the ticking of a timer you can hear in the background, even when you're pretending not to. I went about my day, like usual. Folded, laundry, cleared out my inbox, watered the succulents near the window. Each task small, deliberate, grounding. The kind of routine that tells your nerves they have no place here. But my eyes kept flicking to the clock. 3:17 p.m. No payment, no response. I logged into the venue portal and checked the account again. The balance still sat in red, $9,450 remaining. I refreshed the page once, just once. Then I logged out and closed the tab. They had time. What they didn't have was awareness. Or maybe they had it and chose denial. That wouldn't surprise me. Marcus had always relied on charm to buy him time, and his mother on reputation to avoid scrutiny. They assumed systems were suggestions, that rules bent around good intentions. But this wasn't about intention, it was about payment. I rechecked the email I sent that morning. No errors, no ambiguity. The subject line alone was enough to send a chill through any seasoned planner. Everything had been done right. I glanced out the window. The sky was dimming, a slow descent into dusk. Somewhere across town, there were probably steaming dresses, charging phones, curling hair, smiling for selfies, completely unaware that the stage they were building their fairy tale on was balanced on an unpaid invoice. 4:12 p.m. I poured another cup of tea. This time, I didn't let it cool. I drank it hot, steady, unsweetened. 4:29 p.m. Still nothing. It wasn't about revenge. I kept reminding myself of that. This wasn't retaliation for the breakup or the erasure. It wasn't even about what his mother said. It was about boundaries. About calling time on a debt no one else was willing to recognize. 4:42 p.m. I placed the manila folder with the contract and receipts back into my drawer. Not locked, just filed. The way one files away evidence after a case has been presented. 4:55 p.m. I opened the venue's website again. Watched the seconds tick down on the confirmation page. 5:00 p.m. No payment. I sat back in my chair, let my shoulders drop. There was no alert, no dramatic pop-up, just a quiet notation at the top of the page. Status, reservation canceled due to non-payment. That was it. No call, no last-minute save. Just a quiet expiration. I closed the browser and exhaled slowly. They hadn't expected me to follow through, but weddings built on unpaid promises don't begin with forever. They end with silence. And this time, the silence was mine. I didn't text him, didn't send a follow-up, didn't ask if he'd seen the email. I didn't reach out to his mother either. There was no satisfaction in confrontation, no need to hear excuses I could already script from memory. Instead, I let the silence settle, firm, undisturbed. The night moved on without interruption. I read a few chapters of an old novel, ate leftovers, took a long shower. Normal things. Intentional things. I left my phone in the living room the whole time. I knew what was happening on their side. Or at least, I could imagine it. The first wave of confusion when the coordinator called. The disbelief. The urgency that would creep into their voices when they realized the venue wasn't unlocked. The staff hadn't shown. The lights weren't on. Then, the scramble. Calls made, emails checked, accusations exchanged. And finally, the sinking acknowledgement. They hadn't paid. And worse, that they weren't in control anymore. I slept well that night, not because I was proud of what had happened, but because I knew it was fair, just, the kind of fairness that doesn't need applause to feel whole. The next morning, the first message arrived at 7:13 a.m., Marcus. No greeting, just, "Did you do something to the venue?" I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked it again without replying. At 7:32, another, "They said the reservation was canceled. What's going on?" Still, I said nothing, because the answer was already written. It had been sent in a time-stamped email with the terms attached and the deadline clearly stated. I wasn't going to explain the obvious to a man who never bothered to read the fine print. By 8:05, his mother had joined in. A voicemail, her voice sharp and brittle. "Jasmine, this is beyond petty. Whatever your issue is, you could have come to us directly. We could have worked something out. But this is vindictive. I played it once, no reaction, then deleted it. They didn't understand. This wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't some last gasp of bitterness. It was structure, cause and effect, a chain of events set into motion by a single assumption that I wouldn't hold them accountable. By noon, the ceremony should have started. Instead, my phone stayed quiet. No apologies, no attempts to understand. Just blame, thinly veiled and poorly aimed. They had forgotten what mattered most, that the foundation of any event, any relationship, is agreement. And I hadn't agreed to this. I had paid for the venue, signed for it, carried it. And when the time came, I asked for one thing: closure. Not emotionally, financially, tangibly. They chose not to respond, and the venue chose not to open. After the last voicemail, everything went still. No more texts, no more calls, just silence. The kind that hangs heavy after a storm, not peace exactly, more like recalibration. Like everyone involved was trying to figure out what story to tell next, now that the original one had unraveled. I didn't need to wonder what they were saying. I knew. She overreacted. She wanted attention. She was never over him. She ruined a special day out of spite. But what none of them would admit, not to each other, not even to themselves, was the part that mattered. The bill wasn't paid. There was no vengeance, no malice, just accountability. And now that the consequences had arrived, they were stunned into stillness because they had never expected them to come dressed in formality and law. They had expected a scene, drama, emotion they could dismiss. Instead, they got cancellation emails. They got a venue locked behind wrought iron gates and a signature that couldn't be undone with tears or blame. I took a walk that afternoon, nothing far, just a few blocks through my neighborhood past the cafe where I used to wait for Marcus on Friday nights when he said he was running late. The air was cool, leaves shifting underfoot. I didn't listen to music. I didn't call anyone. I just walked. When I came home, I made tea, opened my laptop, scanned my email. Nothing new, just confirmation from the venue. Reservation status officially closed, no refund applicable. I printed it. 3 holes added to the folder. The silence was never the point. But it had become the statement. They had ignored the first message, laughed off the possibility, missed the deadline, and now they were stuck in the echo chamber of their own arrogance. What stunned them wasn't the consequence. It was that the consequence came from me, the quiet one, the patient one, the woman who always paid on time and didn't raise her voice, the one who smiled through their judgment and hosted their parties and poured their wine. They mistook kindness for weakness, order for passivity. But silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy, I didn't expect them to understand. Not fully. Understanding requires accountability, and they weren't built for that. What I did expect was distance. And finally, that's what I had. They would talk to each other, to their friends, maybe even to people I knew. But I wouldn't respond, not to speculation, not to blame, because the facts were already filed, time-stamped, archived. The door had closed. I didn't slam it. I didn't lock it with rage. I just walked away after making sure it could no longer swing open behind me. By the next morning, the silence fractured. The first crack came through a mutual friend, a message that read, "Did you really cancel the wedding venue?" No punctuation, no warmth, just disbelief sharpened into accusation. I didn't reply. An hour later, another. They said you blindsided them, that they had no idea. That part almost made me laugh, because isn't that always the story? The people who ignore deadlines, skip steps, and dismiss responsibility are somehow the ones blindsided when consequences arrive. They mistake warnings for background noise. They treat silence like absence. And then they act stunned when the structure collapses. By noon, the gossip had spread. Mutual contacts, acquaintances, even old coworkers started liking old photos, commenting on my stories with cryptic emojis or passive remarks. A few went digging for sides to choose, trying to decide which version of the story felt safest to stand beside. But I wasn't interested in the public version. I was interested in the truth. And the truth was simple. The reservation was under my name. The invoice was unpaid. The deadline passed. The cancellation was automatic under contract law. Everything else was noise. Marcus finally broke the silence that afternoon with a message longer than anything he'd sent since the breakup. "You could have just reached out. We were going to take care of it. You didn't have to embarrass us like this. You made your point, okay? Now people are asking questions. You really want that kind of attention?" I reread it twice. Not for meaning. For tone. Embarrass. That was the word that stuck. Not unfair, not mistaken, just embarrassed. Because that's what this was about. Not the money, not the wedding, but the shame of being held accountable in a way that couldn't be smoothed over with charm or excuses. They weren't angry about what I did. They were angry that it worked. I didn't respond. Instead, I saved the message, printed it, and added it to the folder. Not for revenge, for record keeping. Let the story stand on its own, word for word, in his own voice. That night, a friend sent me a screenshot of his mother's social post, a lengthy caption under a black and white photo of Marcus standing alone near a floral arch that was never used. She wrote about resilience, about disappointment, about how some people lack the grace to let go. I closed the screenshot without finishing it, because grace is not allowing yourself to be used. And letting go is refusing to carry the weight of someone else's avoidance. They had spent so long pretending I didn't matter. But when the venue didn't open and the music never played, and the guests turned to each other in confusion, that absence spoke louder than any speech I could have given. And for once, they had to listen. I waited until the evening. The messages kept coming all day, varying tones, layered emotions, but circling the same question. Why did you do this? At 6:47 p.m., I answered. Not with a call, not with an apology, just an email. Subject line, final balance, supporting documentation. No greeting, no explanation, just 3 attachments. The original venue contract, signed and dated, with my name as the sole primary contact. The unpaid invoice marked past due. A copy of the email I sent the day before the wedding with the subject line, final venue balance due, immediate action required. I sent it to Marcus and his mother. CC'd the venue coordinator again. No extra words, no anger, just the facts. It took 5 minutes before Marcus replied. A short burst of defensiveness wrapped in feigned confusion. You knew we were getting married. You could have reminded us. This feels intentional. I didn't respond. The receipts had already said everything that needed to be said. What they were grappling with wasn't betrayal. It was clarity. Unavoidable, time-stamped, contractual clarity. The kind that can't be talked down or rewritten. The kind that doesn't care about intentions. They weren't mad that I canceled the reservation. They were mad that I had the right to. Mad that the paper trail didn't crumble under scrutiny. Mad that the image they'd been curating of a graceful exit, of a clean break, of a perfectly planned new chapter had been undone by a simple fact. They hadn't paid their bill, and I wasn't their cleanup crew anymore. I watched the read receipts roll in, watched the silence stretch long between each response. There were no apologies, no admissions, just frustration dressed up as confusion. Still trying to find a way to make this my failure. But failure requires neglect. And what I'd done was the opposite. I had followed the process, protected myself, respected the contract more than they respected my contribution. At 8:23 p.m., I received one last reply from his mother. We never thought you'd actually go through with it. It's shocking how cold you can be. I let the words sit. Not because they hurt, but because they proved my point. They never thought I would act. They mistook composure for softness, boundaries for bitterness. They assumed silence was the same as permission. And now, faced with the weight of accountability, they were trying to reframe the story again into something that cast them as victims of a woman who simply refused to be forgotten. I closed my inbox for the night, filed the day's messages with the rest of the evidence. Then I turned off the lights, made a cup of tea, and sat in the quiet. Let them spin whatever version of the story they needed to soothe their pride. But the receipts didn't need rewriting, they just needed reading. Her voice came through in sharp waves. I didn't pick up when she called. I let it go to voicemail. Twice. By the third attempt, she left a message. I listened to it once, alone in my kitchen, the blinds drawn, a quiet rain tapping the window. Jasmine, she began, already breathless. This is unthinkable. You've crossed a line. Do you have any idea what you've done? This was supposed to be a sacred day, a family event. You've made a spectacle out of something beautiful. Her words tumbled out, brittle and urgent, like glass rolling across tile. There was no grace in her voice now, no veiled superiority, just pure, unfiltered fury. You always needed everything to be about you. Is that what this was? A statement? Because congratulations, Jasmine, you made one. I stood still, the phone pressed to my ear. No reaction, no note-taking, just listening. I hope you're satisfied, she said at the end. I hope you're proud of yourself. Click. That was the last of it. I played the message again later that night, not for meaning, but for tone. Her words weren't. Built on grief. They were built on control slipping through her fingers. She wasn't mourning the wedding. She was mourning the loss of the illusion that nothing could touch her family's perfect image. But I hadn't touched anything. I had simply stopped holding it up. What they never understood, what she especially refused to see, was that I had been silent out of respect, not weakness. that every moment I absorbed her dismissiveness, every time I smiled through her condescension, I was choosing restraint. And restraint has limits. It was her voice, more than anything, that solidified the line. Not just the rage, but the entitlement beneath it. The belief that I owed them smooth endings and unearned grace, even after being erased from the story I helped build. That voicemail didn't sting. It clarified. She wasn't angry about the loss of the venue. She was angry that her narrative was interrupted, that I hadn't faded away quietly, that I hadn't played the role she'd cast me in, the girl who wasn't wife material and should have stayed grateful for the crumbs of proximity. Now she was left with a canceled wedding, an inbox full of questions, and a guest list wondering why the event of the season never happened. And all I had done was honor the agreement. Nothing more. No retaliation, no spectacle. Just a name on a contract, a balance unpaid, and the silence that followed the truth. They saw the end. That much was clear. They saw the locked gates, the confused guests, the photographer packing up without taking a single frame. They saw the aftermath, the fallout, the blank space where vows were supposed to be. But they never saw the beginning. They didn't see the Tuesday evenings I spent comparing lighting packages, the vendor calls I took on lunch breaks, the budget spreadsheet I updated religiously, color-coded and annotated with notes Marcus never read. They didn't see the way I combed through floral mock-ups to match his mother's preferences, even when they clashed with mine. The time I canceled a weekend trip to meet with the venue coordinator alone because Marcus forgot the appointment. They didn't see the care behind the choices, the weight of the effort that went unnoticed, unappreciated, unacknowledged. They didn't see the version of me that gave first, that compromised, that trusted. I remember the day I first walked through that venue. It was raining. Just a light mist, barely there, but the terrace was glowing. The ivy along the walls dripped with silver. The slate underfoot was slick and clean. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where we'll begin. Marcus had nodded, distracted, smiled and said, "Sure, it's nice," before returning to whatever email he was answering on his phone. But I'd already pictured it. I saw the tables, the strings of lights, the music that would rise as the night darkened. I saw the guests, the dancing, the speeches. I saw a future that never made it past that misty day. And when I paid the deposit, I did it with the certainty that this was something we were building together, that my investment was a foundation. Instead, it became a footnote, a forgotten line on a forgotten bill. They built on it anyway, planned without acknowledgement, took the vision and painted over the parts they didn't like. But you can't rewrite ownership with assumptions. You can't erase someone's name from a contract by pretending they never mattered. And you cannot use someone's silence as permission. What they never saw, what they refused to see, was how much I had already given. Not just money, not just time, but grace, space, every chance to handle this with dignity, until the very last moment. When the deadline passed and the venue closed and all the illusions collapsed into quiet consequence, that was the only time they looked back. Not to understand, but to place blame, because the truth was too inconvenient to name. They never paid. They never asked. They never thought I would hold the line. And all they saw was what happened after the door was closed. But I remember what it took to build the room in the first place. I passed the venue the day after the wedding was supposed to take place. It was early afternoon. The sun was out high and sharp, casting crisp shadows along the sidewalk. I didn't plan to go there. I was running errands, picking up dry cleaning, stopping for groceries. But my road curved past Eldon Terrace like a quiet dare. The gate was closed. No ribbons, no florals, no music, just silence. I pulled into a nearby lot, stepped out, and stood across the street. The building looked smaller somehow, less grand without the crowd it was meant to hold. The arched entrance where guests were supposed to gather stood bare. The terrace, where they had likely imagined vows and photographs, was empty. I stayed there for a long moment. Not out of nostalgia, not out of spite, just stillness. There was no joy in what had happened. No sense of triumph, only a sense of finality. The kind that doesn't need applause or validation. I thought about Marcus, about the way he had once stood in that very space, pointing out where the string lights could hang, where the DJ might set up. His excitement had always felt real, but so had his forgetfulness. His tendency to disappear when responsibility came calling. And now, with everything undone, he was left with a story that didn't end in ceremony. A day meant for celebration, reduced to phone calls and explanations. And still, he didn't see the difference between loss and consequence. I crossed the street and approached the gate. The lock glinted in the sun. Beyond it, a few scattered leaves rolled across the stones. There was no evidence of what could have been, no sign of their almost wedding. It looked like nothing had ever been planned here at all. I didn't linger. Closure wasn't the goal. I didn't come to gather pieces or soften edges. There was nothing left to restore. Some stories don't require a final conversation. Some endings don't need dialogue. They just need distance. And silence, when chosen, not forced, can be the cleanest kind of conclusion. On my way back to the car, I passed a woman sweeping the entrance of a flower shop nearby. She glanced at me, nodded, then returned to her broom without a word. The world had already moved on, and so had I. Back home, I placed my keys on the table and opened a new folder. Not for Marcus, not for the wedding, for something else. Something that hadn't yet been written. There would be no more replies, no more justifications, no final call to untangle what they broke. They had their moment, their decisions, their silence. And I had mine. I didn't need closure. Because the door didn't drift shut. I closed it. Myself. Consequences are rarely loud. They don't always arrive with sirens or shouting. Sometimes they come as silence, as doors that don't open, as events that never start, as a single line in an email, reservation canceled due to non-payment. That's what they received. Not a spectacle, not revenge, just the end of a transaction they ignored. It would be easier for them to frame it as vindictive. To say, I acted out of jealousy or wounded pride. That I sabotaged their moment. Because accepting the truth means looking in a mirror they've spent years avoiding. But the truth isn't elusive. It's written in receipts, in agreements, in ignored deadlines. They didn't pay. They didn't ask. They didn't plan for the foundation they were standing on. And I didn't remove anything they didn't leave neglected. Marcus once told me I was too meticulous, that I planned like I was trying to outmaneuver life itself. He said it like it was a flaw. Like preparation was a wall I built between myself and spontaneity. But what he never understood was that preparation is care. Care for what you build. Care for who you involve. Care for how you carry weight that others treat like air. So when I enforced the deadline, I wasn't punishing them. I was honoring the care I had given, the deposit, the planning, the patience, all of it deserved recognition. And when it didn't come, I withdrew my presence. Not my voice, not my anger, just the part of me that made things work behind the scenes. I let the system speak. They called it cruel, called me calculated, but that's projection. What they felt wasn't cruelty. It was consequence. The kind they never thought would land. The kind they never expected from someone who didn't raise her voice. It's easy to underestimate someone who doesn't seek center stage, to forget the power of those who work quietly, diligently, without fanfare. But power doesn't require volume. It requires timing. And I had waited long enough. There's something poetic in that. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just clean, just real. The knowledge that you acted, not out of impulse, but out of resolve. That you let people show you who they were, and then made decisions accordingly. What I reclaimed wasn't just money, it was agency. The right to say no, the right to set terms. The right to be seen as more than a stepping stone on someone else's path. And that clarity? That's the real gift, not the fallout. Not their discomfort, but the peace that followed. The steady, unwavering knowledge that I had nothing left to prove. They'll move on. Rebuild. Reframe the story. But I'll remain grounded. Because I didn't take anything from them. I simply stopped giving. It came at 9:02 a.m. on a Monday. The subject line was bland. Venue account status update. But the contents were final. The email, short and precise, confirmed everything I already knew. The reservation had been formally closed. The remaining balance was never paid. The venue had released the date. No reschedules allowed. The file had been marked complete. No drama, no commentary, just procedure. I read it once. Then I printed it. 3 holes. Slipped into the folder behind the final invoice and the cancellation confirmation. The very last page. I closed the folder slowly. Ran my palm across the cover. It wasn't thick, only a dozen sheets or so, but it held weight. Not in paper, in clarity. This was what resolution looked like. Not a confrontation, not a speech, not a final scene with raised voices and emotional unraveling. Just facts. Finalized. I stood by my kitchen window with a cup of tea in hand, the folder resting beside me on the counter. Outside, the street was already busy. People walking, bikes weaving through traffic, the city humming with forward motion. Somewhere across town, Marcus was probably doing the same thing. Pouring coffee, checking messages, trying to pretend the weekend didn't shatter the image he built. Maybe his mother was still calling vendors, still spinning stories about weather complications or scheduling mix-ups. Let them. Whatever they needed to tell themselves, they were free to do so. But the story in my hands, the one printed, time-stamped, filed, wasn't a version. It was the truth. And I didn't need to share it. I didn't forward the email. Didn't reply with a final word. There was no need. Some truths don't require performance. They just need space. I placed the folder in my filing cabinet, not at the front, not in plain sight, just where it belonged, labeled and complete. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a weapon. It was a record. Proof of what happens when you stop letting people borrow your silence without interest. There was no satisfaction in it, just stillness. Like closing a book you never planned to reread. Not because it hurt, but because the ending taught you what you needed to know. I looked out at the city one last time before turning off the light and leaving the kitchen. A quiet alert buzzed on my phone as I walked away. Another notification from the bank. A routine one. Low priority. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. The account was closed. The case was finished. And for the first time in a long time, nothing was waiting to be fixed. The phrase had lingered for months. Not wife material. She said it with a soft smile, like she was offering me a compliment I wasn't evolved enough to recognize. As if being too capable was a flaw. As if knowing how to protect my time, my money, my effort made me less deserving of permanence. But now, with the folder filed, the noise behind me, and the path ahead clear, I finally understood what she meant. Wife material, in her eyes, was obedience. It was compliance dressed as grace. It was saying yes without question, supporting without boundaries, giving without ever expecting repayment. It was knowing your place in someone else's story and staying there, quietly, while they built around you. And I never fit that mold. I planned. I organized. I kept records. I remembered what others forgot. I noticed what went unsaid and didn't always let it slide. I made room for people until they mistook that space as theirs by default. I was never the woman who begged for love. I just asked for partnership. And when it didn't come, I left the door open long enough for clarity to walk through. What they took from me wasn't just a venue or a balance. It was the belief that I could be rewritten, that I could be erased from my own contributions and still be expected to clap from the sidelines. But I didn't stay there. I reclaimed the terms. I protected what I paid for. And I did it without shouting. Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the decision to act clearly when everyone expects you to stay seated. I thought of Marcus's face that day in the cafe, the way his smile cracked when he realized the papers were real, that the evidence had been there all along, and he never thought I'd use it. That was never about money. That was about the illusion of control breaking. Because the story he had been telling himself about me, about us, only worked if I stayed silent. But I had spoken. Not in rage, not in apology, but in action. I stood at the edge of that chapter and didn't flinch. And maybe, to them, that made me hard, unforgiving, cold. But to me, it made me whole. Because I was never too much, I was just too clear. And the moment I stopped making excuses for other people's negligence, everything came into focus. Wife material isn't weakness. It's knowing your worth even when others pretend not to see it. It's refusing to disappear quietly. It's choosing yourself in full. I was never the wrong material. They were just building something temporary, and I was built to last.